Why are we doing a presentation on peak oil at a community meeting, right? Shouldn't we be taking this to City Hall or the White House for that matter? I mean, isn't this a matter of national security? Well, it is. Peak oil is going to have big impacts at the personal level, the local level, the national level, and the global level. The question is, on what level is it most effective to react on? As Adam mentioned, the Hirsch report said it's going to take 10 to 20 years to orchestrate a large-scale response to peak oil, which we don't have. And that, of course, assumes we have the political willpower to do it, which we don't because the government is so heavily invested in growth and saying we've got to stop economic growth. Now, there's a lot of things that you as an individual or as a consumer can do about this right away. But if you're going to stick within sort of the consumer global economic model, there's only so much efficiency you can achieve. Now, this is where a lot of the peak oil bloggers, what I like to call the survivalists, reach the conclusion that what you'd better do is cash in your life savings, buy some land up in the hills, build a bunker, stock it with some gold bars, some ammo, 6 months of canned food, right? Now that would buy you some resiliency for a little while. But eventually you're going to need to grow more food, you're going to need to have new supplies, you're going to need healthcare, you're going to have to re-engage with some form of economy eventually because individuals by themselves, they're just not that resilient. So what does that leave? That leaves the community scale, which is agile and resilient. Oh, and a note on the community scale, what that precisely is. Historically, that is before the oil age, the vast majority of communities had populations in the 5 to 50,000 range. Does anyone know what the population of the inner sunset is? I don't know what it is exactly, but I know it's well within that range. So if you think community scale, just think the inner sunset. Okay. So what does community have? What is it that exists at the community scale that the other scales don't have that makes it so productive? Well, not to put too fine a point on it, communities have social capital. Now, what does social capital mean? Well, I think Yogi Berra said it best. It means that if you don't go to somebody's funeral, they won't come to yours, in a nutshell. Okay, but seriously, right? Econ 101, capital is simply the means to acquire or produce goods and services. That sounds like something pretty useful to have in a post-peak oil world. And capital comes in many forms. At the most basic level, you've just got a physical capital, a physical tool, right, like a bicycle. Then you've got knowledge, which they call human capital. That's a little more flexible. Then you've got financial capital, right, which is the most flexible of all. It's the lifeblood of the economy. And then you've got social capital. Well, if financial capital is the lifeblood of the formal economy, social capital is the lifeblood of the informal economy. And what social capital is, really, is just your connections, specifically your connections to people who trust you to act within a social norm of generalized reciprocity. So what do I mean by generalized reciprocity? Well, an act of specific reciprocity would be like a barter, right? And why don't we barter? Because it's hard, right? You have to have something that I want, but that you don't want, and I have to have something that you want, but that I don't want, and we have to agree that they're about equal value, and we have to have them ready at the same time, right? It's really hard. That's why no one's going to trade you their pudding for your apple at the school cafeteria, right? I mean, but social capital is generalized reciprocity, right? Which means I'm going to do something for you, and I'm not going to expect anything specific in return. I just know that eventually you'll, do a favor for me when I need it. Okay. And in fact, not to offend any free market economists out there, but there's a lot of things that social capital can get you much more efficiently than financial capital. So here's a list of some things that are statistically highly correlated with social capital: educational performance, crime rates, economic prosperity. You know which one of these actually has the strongest correlation of all? Health and happiness. In fact, if you don't belong to any social groups and you join ISPN today, you cut your risk of dying in the next year in half, statistically speaking. That's as good as quitting smoking, in fact. Yeah, okay. Okay, so the benefits of social capital, pretty self-evident. Does anyone want to hazard a guess at what's happened to our social capital reserves in the last half century? Anyone want to go guess which direction? Yeah, okay, you got it. It's down across the board. Voting, civic and religious participation, or union membership, but also just informal social gatherings. We're having dinner with our friends less, we're having fewer game nights, we're playing less sports, we're volunteering less. And we don't trust anyone anymore. Remember hitchhiking? Ask your grandparents about it. I mean, it's, And at the same time, we're seeing a major increase in memberships in organizations where membership means you send in a check every year, and the number of police and lawyers per capita. So that's a pretty strong indication that we're relying on professionals to handle certain things, dispute mediation and whatnot, that used to be just handled directly by the community. Okay. So why did this happen? Well, there's a lot of factors. The two most statistically significant should probably come as no surprise. First of all, you got reliance on the automobile and urban sprawl. Not only are we taking more of our time to get to work, but we're not running into people on the way, right? Or at least not in a good way. If you run into someone in your car, it's not quite the same thing as running into someone on the street when you're on foot. And more importantly, the settlement patterns in the suburbs, right? You got people who are living in suburb A, working in suburb B, and then shopping in suburb C on their way back home. And the people who work and shop in suburb A are only there during the day. So which community do all these people belong to, right? None of the above, right? I mean, how could you possibly have a community meeting where all the people who are invested in the community will show up because they're not in the same town at the same time? Then there's television. I mean, do I really even need to go into this one? Compared to turning on the TV, I mean, anything else, other way of entertaining yourself, just takes so much effort, right? And the thing is, I mean, try staying home all week with the TV turned off, right? It's kind of lonely. But, you know, if you come home and you turn on The Daily Show and Jon Stewart tells you how his day was and what was going on in the world, right? I mean, you get this feeling that you've gone out, but the truth is you haven't actually developed any social capital while doing it. Now, to be fair, it's not just technological. And in fact, social capital among, for instance, the World War II generation really didn't go down. What happened is their percentage of the population went down and the percentage of boomer population went up. Okay? And to be fair, this sort of community civic utopia of the 1950s was really only a utopia if you were, say, like a white Christian heterosexual male, right? If you were any other sort of minority, it wasn't so great. And what one generation's community looked to another generation like conformity. Now, this generational cycle is important because actually historians have documented sort of these back and forth cycles pretty much throughout all of modern history. And you probably all know this part of the story pretty well, right? What happened from the 50s to now. But what gets lost a lot of times is there's this assumption that prior to 1950, America just had this consistently high level of social capital, which is in fact not the case. From 1850 to 1950, we didn't have a consistently high level of social capital. We had another drop, and it rebounded. So if you take a look at why that happened. Okay, 1850, the country still looks pretty much like it did at the time of the Revolutionary War. The Industrial Revolution comes in, and you've got disruptive technologies, right? I mean, you think internet has changed everything about the way we live? Try turning on electricity in your town for the first time. It really changed everything. These technologies enabled the first really modern cities on the scale we've seen today. And the people who populated these cities, largely immigration from Europe. In fact, in 1890, in 18 of the 20 largest US cities, there were more foreign-born adults than native-born adults. Okay, so just imagine that for a second. I mean, talk about loss of social capital. The people who are coming in have lost their contacts with their villages. The people who lived there before have seen the city completely transform in front of their eyes. Now, just like in the last 50 years, standards of living were definitely going up, but for some more than others. Okay, this is often known as the Gilded Age because of the extravagant wealth of the robber barons and, of course, their mega corporations. Okay, this was sort of the first great merger wave of history. Mega corporations which had a lot of political influence, or corruption is another way of putting it. The bottom line is that the traditional community institutions that we had in place, which were all geared towards small towns, small businesses, and at the city level they were geared towards small cities, were just no longer relevant, or they just weren't there at all. Okay, and there's a quote that sums it up pretty well. There are no precedents to guide us, no wisdom that wasn't made for a simpler age. We have changed our environment more quickly than we know how to change ourselves.